Can one piece change the fate of an entire team in Formula One? And what happens when that decision comes just when the rules of the game have just been rewritten? The 2025 Formula One season has begun with an underground tension that can barely hide behind the usual paddock paraphernalia. In just 3 races, the power positions have begun to be outlined, and the contestants have divided into 2 categories: those who respond with aggressive innovations and those who try to contain the damage while understanding the new language of the technical regulation. Within this scenario, the Spain Grand Prix stands not only as a traditional calendar event, but as a critical dividing line in the championship narrative. Barcelona, due to its demanding configuration, its abrasive asphalt and its ability to highlight any aerodynamic weakness, becomes the ideal or brutal place to debut a change in this magnitude. The technical directive TD018 issued by the FIA does not reach a vacuum. It is the accumulated product of weeks of suspicions, of comparatives on video to table, and of public and private accusations that have saturated the competitive environment. Since the mid-2024 season, the teams began to notice that certain cars, particularly McLaren, seemed to behave with unusual efficiency in rapid curves, as if the car knew exactly when to generate more aerodynamic load without suffering penalties on the line. What was just a murmur at the beginning became a generalized cry when the high-resolution cameras installed during the Belgium GP showed how some front ailerons seemed to collapse down under load, and then recover their form as if nothing had happened. The engineers knew what that meant: illegal flexion in practice, although not necessarily on paper. Because the previous regulation allowed a tolerance of up to 15 millimeters of vertical deflection in static tests. A figure that the smartest teams had learned to use in their favor, designing pieces that met the rules in the laboratory, but that became trampolines of efficiency on track. With the TD018, the FIA reduces that tolerance to only 10 millimeters, and does so surprisingly and with immediate effect. This decision, taken after a political pressure process orchestrated by Ferrari and Red Bull, not only redefines the technical limits of aerodynamic design, but forces all teams to rethink what they considered as valid until yesterday. This is where Ferrari enters with a decision that touches the reckless. Instead of a complete aerodynamic package, they decide to focus only on a new version of the front wing. This is not a cautious or improvised measure. It is a play that responds to a cold and precise logic. In a technical environment where the rules just mutate, the only way to learn is quickly to simplify the variables. The more new pieces are introduced at the same time, the more difficult it will be to understand which one does not work and which one does not. Therefore, the team led by Frédéric Vasseur has opted for this surgical strategy, with the intention of obtaining a clean photograph of the impact of the new directive without interference. But it is not just about science or strategy. There is also a political component. At the moment when Ferrari chooses not to climb the aerodynamic war, he is sending a message. We are so sure of this design that we do not need more than this piece to close the gap with our rivals. It is an implicit challenge to McLaren, a notice to Red Bull, and above all, an internal fire test for the engineering and simulation departments of Maranello. This is the perfect storm. A radical change of regulations, a circuit that requires surgical precision in the balance of the car, and a strategic decision that can change not only the course of the championship, but the perception of the team before its own followers. All that is preparing to explode in Barcelona. A city that could see the birth of a new Ferrari, or witness its most resonant technical collapse since the hybrid era. In an environment as ruthlessly competitive as that of Formula One, where every thousands of seconds slope millions of euros, technical development decisions not only define the immediate performance of a team, but also configure their narrative throughout the championship. And Ferrari, a team with a story marked by both glory and strategic disappointments, has chosen to bet everything at a single letter in the Barcelona Grand Prix: a new front wing. This is not a lower modification or a simple aesthetic adjustment. It is a complete reinterpretation of the frontal aerodynamic flow under the new demands of the TD018 directive. The piece has been designed not only to meet the new 10 mm flexion restriction, but to transform that limitation into a competitive advantage. The objective is clear: maintain the efficiency of the air flow to the ground and the pontoons, ensuring stability without compromising the speed in line or curve adhesion. The boldness of this decision lies at the time and loneliness of the movement. In an era where the equipment tends to introduce complete packages, redesigned soils, changes in barge boards, modified diffusers, tight suspension geometries, Ferrari has decided to isolate a single variable. And that, although at first glance it may seem a limitation, it is actually a deliberate choice of scientific method applied to the highest level of motoring. If the new spoiler works, the team will have unequivocal evidence that its path is correct. If not, they can go back without compromising their entire aerodynamic package, avoiding a waterfall of errors that would have sunk them in other times. Internally, this bet is generating both enthusiasm and tension. The data obtained in the wind tunnel and the CFD simulation showed promising results, but the track as always in the F1 has the last word. The Barcelona circuit, for its high-speed curves such as 3 and 9, and heavy braking areas such as curve 10, is one of the most severe test banks that exist. If the new spoiler manages to maintain the balance of the car, especially in the prolonged turns where the frontal aerodynamic load is critical, Ferrari will know what he has given in the target. In addition, this movement reveals an organizational maturity that Ferrari has not always shown in the past. Instead of hurrying to implement updates by media or internal political pressure, the team has opted for a step-by-step methodology. Fred Vasseur has insisted that they first need to understand how the car reacts to this unique piece before continuing with the rest of the development plan. This approach contrasts with previous strategic errors, where massive changes introduced simultaneously caused more confusion than improvement. But there is also a subliminal message in this strategy. Ferrari wants to convey that he does not need despair, that he is in control of his technical destiny. In a championship where McLaren has started strongly and Red Bull still seeking balance, Ferrari tries to position himself as the methodical, calculator, patient, but lethal team. This wing is more than a piece of carbon fiber and titanium. It is a declaration of principles. The pressure, however, is immense. Barcelona does not forgive. If the SF25 suffers from subviring or instability in braking, if the spoiler fails to maintain the necessary dynamic balance in the linked curves of the third sector, the criticisms will be immediate. And with such a tight championship, losing the development train for a bad bet could cost much more than a race. Ferrari knows. And yet he has decided to play it. Because there are moments in Formula One in which the only way to advance is to bet everything. To one piece. At the most critical moment. Against all forecasts. The 2025 Grand Prix is not just the debut of a new piece in Ferrari's car. It is a public examination of the team's ability to make decisions under pressure, to innovate within a restrictive frame and, above all, to adapt faster than its rivals. The implications of this unique bet are deep and multidimensional, and its impact could extend far beyond the race in Barcelona. The first and most immediate consequence is technical. If the redesigned front wing fails in meeting its objectives, it will not only affect the performance of the SF25 over the weekend, it will also unleash a crisis of trust within the Maranello team, calling for the reliability of the data generated in the wind tunnel, the CFD simulations and the correlation system between what the software predicts and what happens on the royal track. A technical dissonance of that caliber can have a domino effect, forcing Ferrari to stop its development plan to reassess the entire aerodynamic concept of the car, losing critical weeks in front of rivals that are already building on a more stable basis. But if the spoiler works and not only passes the flexion tests, but also generates the necessary balance without compromising the speed or stability, then an immense door for Ferrari opens. The team can implement the rest of its aerodynamic updates with real and clear validation. They will not be speculating. They will be moving safely. And that, in a championship where every week counts, it can be the difference between fighting for podiums or for victories. From a psychological point of view, Barcelona's career is also a fire test for pilots. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton will not only have to adapt to a car with a potentially different frontal behavior, but should do so with a single free session before the classification, which dramatically reduces the margin of maneuver. For Leclerc, which has shown to be particularly sensitive to the balance of the car, this change can play both for and against depending on its adaptation speed. For Hamilton, who is still knowing the secrets of the SF25 after his arrival from Mercedes, this will be a new test of his ability to synchronize with a car that is still far from being tamed. There is also a political dimension at stake. The successful implementation of the new wing would validate not only the technical capacities of the team, but also its position within the regulatory discussions with the FIA. Ferrari was one of the teams that most pressed to harden flexion tests. If now shows that it can be competitive even under that new regulatory framework, its influence on future technical decisions will increase. Otherwise, he could be accused of having fired a bullet that bounced in his own body. At the championship level, the impact is even larger. McLaren, currently leader of the World Cup, has not been forced to make radical changes to adapt to the TD018. Your car seems to have been designed with a broader margin of compliance or, as some suspect, with a very fine reading of the regulation from the beginning. Red Bull, on the other hand, faces his own crisis of performance and technical consistency, aggravated by the forced change in his pilot alignment. In that context, a Ferrari revitalized by effective development could completely change the dynamics of the championship. And finally, but not least, there are the public's expectations. Ferrari is not another team. It is an institution that charges with the hope of millions of fans and with a media pressure that does not give truce. When the rampant Cavallino announces that everything is played in a single letter, there is no room for excuses. If they win, they will be celebrated as visionaries. If they fail, the trial will be immediate and fierce. This is how Formula One lives Ferrari. This writes the story when a single piece defines the destiny of a whole season. The Barcelona Grand Prix will not simply be remembered for what happens in the time or podium table. He will be remembered for what he represented. The moment in which a single decision taken by one of the most legendary teams in history put into play months' technical credibility and its place in the fight for the championship. Ferrari has not only introduced a new front wing, he has redefined his development approach, his confidence in his internal processes, and his way of competing in an era of increasingly complex technical restrictions. The fascinating thing about this situation is that the whole ecosystem of Formula One teams, analysts, fans is observing this experiment in real time with magnifying glass. It is not just a technical improvement. It is a public demonstration of method, of calculated engineering as a language of power. Because if Ferrari is right with this unique piece, he will not only win track positions. He will gain authority at the decision tables, will consolidate his status as a real contender in 2025 and recover something that is not always achieved with podiums: legitimacy. But if it fails, the impact could be disproportionate. Not because of the isolated result of a Grand Prix, but because it will question all the technical architecture of the SF25 and the team's ability to correctly read the new regulation. And in Formula One. And you? Do you think Ferrari has been brave or reckless? Can a single piece really transform the destination of a team?